Let's see, any prayer requests we should remember?
Let's pray for good health for everyone po. Rainy season is also flu season, cold season. So I hope that everyone stays fit and healthy.
Yes, Jared.
Um, can you pray for my church, uh, Mount Zion Baptist Church? Um, the neighbor is trying to occupy the front of our church.
Oh.
So, um, yeah,
Because you're not present right now?
no, not really. They're just trying to occupy it every day. Like they're like parking their tricycle and things and extending their homes a little bit. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Uh-oh. I think I'm having some connection issues. Let's see if everything's okay. Okay, I think I'm back. All right, let's remember these things, and especially your church is not meeting yet, though, Jared, in its building.
Um, Currently, yes po. We're actually we're having services every Thursday and Sunday po.
Oh, you are.
For those who are staying there po.
Oh, good. Okay. Okay. So that helps a little bit. I think the vacant buildings, I've been wondering what's all happening when the churches aren't able to meet for all these months. Makes it interesting. All right. One last. Anyone else? For request?
Yung, ako po ma'am, yung pong, yung keyboard, sana makuha ko po bukas. I mean, sana hindi mag-extend yung lockdown until tomorrow.
Okay, you'll have to text us all in the group chat when you finally have it.
Yes.
Pray that nothing goes wrong. All right, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you for another day. We thank you for the opportunity to meet via Zoom, that we can all be together virtually. And we do just thank you for this opportunity, even though it's a unique semester, that we can still have the opportunity to study music. Lord, I do pray that you would continue to protect our health. Lord, protect us from the season right now, and especially from the virus, that you would just help each one to get the sleep they need, even in the busyness of the semester. Lord, I pray for Jared's church, that you would continue to protect, and that you would just be with whatever the situation is with the neighbor trying to occupy the building, that you would give wisdom to the pastor and to the other members there, and that it would not be a problem. Lord, I pray that they would even be able to reach out and reach these neighbors for you, that they would even be able to be a part of the church. Lord, I pray for Cherry, and that everything would go smoothly, that she'd be able to get the keyboard tomorrow, that there'd be no problems, and that the lockdown wouldn't extend. Lord, we do just commit to you this time, and even our churches and our church ministries, and the ability we would like to have to be able to gather again, and just pray that you would work all these things out according to your will and according to your time. Lord, we do look to you for your wisdom and your strength during this class hour. We have a lot of information to cover, and I just pray that you would make it very clear. And we ask this in your name. Amen. All right. A number of you have asked me some questions on the worksheets. That's fine. Feel free, if there's something you don't understand, feel free to text me about it or ask me about it. I would rather you answer something you understood than making guesses that you don't know what you're talking about. So please don't be shy about asking questions. Your verse quiz, I did decide to put it on Google Classroom, so it's there waiting for you. So you may take it anytime between now and Wednesday morning. And your critique, of course, will be Wednesday this week. So your Filipino text, just make sure to line up the syllables as much as possible so that it's easier to see. If the accents don't all work, that's fine. You don't have to line it up so the accents work, just line it up so the syllables are in line, and we'll work with what we can do. in the critique with your rhythm. All right, any questions about what's coming up before we jump into our lecture topic for today? Okay, we are going to continue where we stopped last time. This works. So we are still talking about sacred music and melody. And we discussed last time the purpose of sacred music being ultimately to glorify the Lord, though also to edify believers and impact the lost. Did all of you get your syllabus yet? Do you all have your syllabus now? Yes? You can raise your hand or show it to me. Sherry has hers already. Does anyone else have theirs? Not yet. Boy, the girls are favored, I guess. I don't know. John, do you have yours? You have yours. Okay. So we're still waiting on a couple to get them. The notes are uploaded to Google Classroom if you don't have them yet, but once your syllabus comes, it'll be easier. All right, so the purpose of sacred music, to glorify the Lord, to edify the believers, to impact the lost. Then we talked about different types of sacred music, psalms and what kind of music go with the psalms, hymns and the music that goes with the hymns, and then spiritual songs and the music. We won't review all of that. Then the goal, of course, is always the text, that the text would set the music. That's our goal. So we talked about melody, and the challenging thing is it's hard to analyze a good melody. It's hard to tell you why it's beautiful. It's hard to tell you why we sing it and why we love it. We just know it when we hear it. So it either must do what we expect or it must exceed our expectation, do something better than we're expecting. So we played some examples. It needs to have an expressive quality that's communicating. And if the text, it should also communicate what the text is communicating. You have the different contours, the melodic motion, tension and repose. We talked last week about tendency tones. And I think we kind of almost rushed over this. But the tendency tones are just the tones where there's half step in between. So you have your leading tone that wants to resolve up. You have the scale degree 4 that wants to resolve down. Especially the leading tone in scale degree 4 are especially true if you're dealing with a 5/7 chord, because what the scale degree 4 is the 7th tone of a 5/7 chord. And you remember from music theory that a 7th chord, the 7th always wants to resolve how? Down. Always wants to resolve down. Leading tone always wants to resolve up. So it keeps the motion going. So your harmonies are almost going to be implied just by the melody you write. It's going to be asking for certain harmonies. There can be some variation, but your melody is going to determine that a lot. All right. Wait a minute. Okay. I guess we did this too. Then the rhythm, we talked about balancing similar and contrasting rhythms. And we talked about the melodic tones and how it often will emphasize the 1st or the 5th or the 4th scale degree. And it can be emphasized by either length or by placement, by number of repetitions. And it often will outline those primary chords. So when you're looking at a melody, you're already seeing what the chord progression potentially could be, just by seeing the frequency of tone in those. A lot of times 1st and 5th, sometimes the 4th scale degree is emphasized as well. Okay, new topic. Our new subject of this melody is the melodic form and unity. So we've talked already a lot about motives, but normally a motive is anywhere from 3 to 8 notes, and they're bound together in a distinct rhythmic pattern. Most often in a melody, they would not be a true melodic motive. They would be more likely to be a rhythmic motive that's repeated and gives you the unity. You can have an actual sequence where the melody, the motive, melodic motive is repeated beginning on a different pitch, higher or lower. This can give good unity to a melody. So you're familiar with Fairest Lord Jesus. You see how this happens? Fairest Lord Jesus. Then it goes a third higher. ruler of all nature. Exact same melodic phrase, repeated a third higher with a slight rhythmic change. But we don't even mind the rhythmic change because the melodic motive is there, a third higher. So that's one way that we can provide some unity in our melodies. Phrase endings is another thing to consider. Obviously, your phrases, your 4-measure phrases, are going to end with a cadence. Occasionally, you can have a cadential elision where the cadence, you're expecting a cadence and instead it's replaced with the beginning of the next phrase and we actually continue. We don't have a cadence there. But most often, we have groups of 4-measured phrases in groups of 4 phrases each. And often, a half cadence occurs at the end of the first phrase, which means your scale degree for your melody most likely is going to land on scale degree 2 or scale degree 5. Could be on 4 or 7, but they're hard to resolve. It's much better to do 2 or 5. And then the next phrase will end on the imperfect authentic cadence or a perfect authentic cadence. So if it's perfect authentic cadence, then tonic would be in the melody. And if not, then another melodic tone from the tonic chord would be in the melody. So that's one thing that already gives you some guidance in writing your melody. You already know that the end of the first 4 measures most likely will be scale degree 2 or 5. And the end of the next 4 measures most likely will be either tonic or another note from the 1 chord. So that helps you a little bit. Your ear's going to do some of this automatically for you, but that will just help guide you so you don't have a strange, odd cadence at the end. Then the form of a melody is important to consider. Often a melody will be AABA. It's okay to have a melody that repeats that often. It's easy to remember, especially as a hymn. Sometimes it's ABCD. That can work too, as long as you unify it in other ways with rhythms and other things. It can be ABAB. There's a number of different forms, but form is important. We don't just want this melody that's wandering and going nowhere. We want it to actually have some unity and have some purpose and be memorable, that we can remember it and we can sing it. So here is an example of Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. Just look at it for a second and see who can tell me what form this hymn is in. Just the melody. Line 1 is A, and then who can tell me what the rest of the lines are? Jared?
Is it AABA?
Yes. So this is an example of AABA. It doesn't strike us as boring. It's not. It's a lasting melody that we really enjoy, but it's very simple. So once they had the good A line ends with a perfect authentic cadence, B line, or the second A line, perfect authentic cadence, then actually the B line, another perfect, no, not perfect authentic, imperfect authentic cadence, and then we come down to a perfect authentic at the end as well. So you see how there's never a half cadence in this one, but it works fine. Okay, here's another one. What's the form on this one? Who can say no? Let's see, John, do you know?
A, B, C, D.
No, there is actually a repeat somewhere. Does anyone see it? And remember, we're thinking of 4-measure phrases, so look at the full 4 measures as a phrase. You have it now? Go ahead, John.
It's A, and then chorus.
And the chorus would be B. So it's like
Apa,
A prime, because the second A is a little different at the end, but it
apa.
starts so A prime, and then the chorus is B. This is interesting because this hymn actually only has, am I right? Is it only 12 measures? Only 12 measures, which is unusual. Normally we have 4 measure phrases, and this one only has 3 measure phrases, but it works. Cherry, this is kind of the way yours could be if you don't do the repeat. A lot of times, Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven has the repeat so that it can get the extra phrase in there, the extra 4 measures. But this one doesn't, and it works. All right, so be thinking of that. Don't feel like you can't have some part of your melody repeat. It's helpful if it does repeat. It's easier to remember, either by a sequence, either by a motive, or by an actual A section that repeats somewhere. Can be nice, can be helpful. So, all right, now we get to have some fun. The underlying melodic structure, I think that this helps account sometimes for why melodies work. There was a German theorist named Schenker. Did any of you study about Schenker in theory class? I don't know if he was brought up at all. He developed this whole system of music analysis called Schenkerian analysis. And it can be kind of confusing to study, but basically what he wanted to do was take music and just boil it down to the skeleton. So get rid of all the embellishing tones, get rid of all the extras, just look at the skeleton. If you were diagramming a sentence, it would be, okay, where's the subject, where's the verb? Let's get rid of all the extras. We don't need the modifiers. So he would do that. He said, if you did that, every piece of music would come down to the melody line 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and a harmony of 1, 5, 1. Of course, all harmony does that, right? We start tonic, we end tonic, we have dominant somewhere in the middle before we get back. Okay. So he would just simplify and try to simplify these pieces. Well, one aspect of his reduction that I think is super helpful in melodic study is understanding these structural stepwise connections that are happening in the melody. We have this do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale that sometimes is happening in the melody, but not next to each other. So it's not obvious at a first glance, but it's what makes the melody work. So if you reduce the melody to its framework, its skeleton, no embellishing tones, no non-harmonic tones, and you just look at the primary tones, there's usually this stepwise connection, and it helps the melody sound right to us. Sometimes these tones are emphasized by duration, by repetition, or by metric placement in the measure. So example, I played for you last week, my song, and the chorus starts out, so my song will swell the chorus while the angels' praises ring. You kind of see how it's this ascending melodic line. So in the first measure, you have a G. Halfway through, we have an A. Then we don't, on the next measure downbeat, have a change. We're still on the A. And that's good because it'd be way too predictable if it just went A, B, or G, A, B, C. That would be way too predictable. So instead, the A stays, and then we have a B, but it's not really a B yet. It's kind of an embellishing tone. We finally get to the B in the beat 3 of the next measure. Then the third measure, we have a B. We're still on the B. Finally, by beat 3 of the third measure, we get to the C. Then you'll notice at the very end, we get to the D. So it's like she reached this point of arrival going from G to D. Now you notice that there was an embellishing tone, an appoggiatura, that made us feel like we got to an E, but really it was just an embellishing tone. It didn't fit the chord. It wasn't really part of the harmonic structure. So it's really not important. It's really not a skeletal note. Oops. I'll go back on. Let me see that again. Okay. So it's really just an embellishing note. But you see how that is part of what helps this melody make so much sense. Is it's going where we're expecting, and we're not surprised. Now Beethoven does this too. In his Joyful, joyful, we adore thee, his third line of the piece, melt the clouds of sin and sadness, drive the dark of doubt away. You feel how it's kind of trying to get somewhere? It's interesting because we have an A in measure 1. And then by beat 3, it's like he's trying to get to a B, but he doesn't really quite make it. He kind of plays around with the B and the G, but we're right back on the A on the next measure. He isn't successful. Then the next measure, he goes a little higher. He goes to the B and the C, but we end up back down on the A in measure 3. So he's teasing us. He's trying to get there, but we're still, the dominant note that keeps being repeated is A in every measure. A, A, A. So where does he finally give us a true B that harmonically is a B and we know we're on a new chord? Where does it really happen? You see in measure 3? Beat 3, we now have a B major chord. So the harmony is showing us this is truly a B. It's a secondary dominant. So we're really getting the prominence of the B tone at this point. So now what's the tone we need next? We need a C, or in his case, he's going to almost be like we're in the key of D for this section. So he's going to use a C sharp, which we never really get a true C sharp. He puts it in the alto, or this 4-part arrangement has an alto, but he uses the chord. He uses another secondary dominant chord with that C sharp. So our ear kind of fills in the missing C sharp. We kind of know it's there. But the most fascinating thing is, where do we finally get to the D, the point of arrival that all this is leading to? We get to the D, and it's an octave lower than we expect. He gives us the climax an octave lower. And I think it's just fascinating how this works. It's an octave displacement. So it's what we expected, but it's not exactly what we expected. And his climax is the lowest note of his melody. That's his climax of his piece, the end of the third line, and it's the lowest note. So it's interesting to kind of think of a song that's your favorite song, or maybe a favorite melody of yours, and you think, why is it a favorite melody? What do I like about it? Look at the music and try to see, what do you like about it? Is there a climax somewhere that really gets you? Is there some of this stepwise motion happening where even these leaps are making sense because it's the next pitch your ear wants to hear strongly? And just kind of see if you can analyze some things about your favorite melody that will help guide you in your own writing, although, again, a lot of it's going to be intuitive. And you're not going to really be analyzing your melody and writing it by all this analysis. It won't sound natural. You really need to write it. Just let your ear guide you, let your voice guide you. Be singing as you write. All right. So, melodies have changed a lot throughout history. We don't have a lot of preserved melodies before the Renaissance era. So I'm just going to go back to the Baroque melodies and contrast Baroque music versus 21st century melodies. Were any of you in music theory 3 or 4? Did any of you take counterpoint? Many of you sat in a little bit. Jerry sat in a little bit on that. So counterpoint is very strict rules. It's guided by these very strict rules from the Baroque era where things have to be very strict. So here are some of the rules that the Baroque melodies followed. They avoided repeated notes melodically. They used a lot of stepwise motion. They moved into the strong beats by step, avoided augmented seconds in the melody. Of course, they're hard to hear. They're more disjunct, or if they were disjunct, then a leap larger than a third could be used for variety. But if you had a large leap, you always would change directions after the large leap. You would never have a large leap and keep going that way. You would change direction. And then a leap followed by stepwise motion is better than steps followed by a leap. Doesn't work quite as well. And 2 large leaps in a row must imply the same harmony. Generally, the change of direction for the second leap if the interval is a sixth or larger. So some pretty strict rules to make melodies work. These are actually good things to keep in mind because they just work. It's just how music kind of wants to happen. But in 21st century melodies, you're going to hear a lot more disjunct, a lot more angular, a lot more leaps, larger, more frequent leaps. So we're not so bound by these rules that Bach would have been, that he would have used. We have a little more freedom, we have a little more ability to create, but yet you don't particularly want to throw away all the Baroque rules because they really will help your writing. Then the use of non-chord tones. In Baroque melodies, they only allow dissonance in a very controlled way. If you had a passing tone or a neighboring tone, it could only come on a weak part of the beat. You could never have an accented passing tone and an accented neighboring tone. Suspensions could be used on a strong beat, but anticipations could only come at a final cadence. You couldn't have a melodic anticipation anywhere but the very final cadence. You couldn't skip away from a non-chord tone, or it would be an unresolved dissonance. So they were very, very careful how they used the non-chord tones. Whereas in 21st century melodies, there's a lot of dissonance, sometimes too much dissonance, but there's a frequent use of non-chord tones on the beat. Non-chord tones sometimes become the unifying factor in a melody. And if you have a tendency tone in Baroque music, you had to resolve it. 4 had to resolve to 3, 7 had to resolve to 1. But in 21st century melodies, sometimes the resolution was delayed and sometimes never resolved, but often it would just be delayed a beat and then finally the resolution would come. So just to consider what are the differences, and your ear knows. You listen to Bach and you listen to anything from our era now that's being written, there's a pretty big distinct difference. So here's the challenge for us as composers. How can you write fresh and interesting music that doesn't go into the pop style? Your ear knows that there's this pop style out there. How can we include harmonic and rhythmic interest that speaks to believers of the 21st century without compromising what we believe? We want to offer to the Lord that which is excellent. But our music must not conform to the spirit of our age. So we have several kinds of association. We have musical style that can be wrong just from the association. Maybe this particular piece isn't really bad in and of itself, but because of the association with this particular group, and they're the ones who wrote it, and most of their music is in a different style, whatever, there's an association that can be a stumbling block to those around us. So there's a musical style we want to be careful of. Then there's a musical style that's really inherently wrong, that we have to analyze, and we have to say, okay, what's wrong with this piece? Why wouldn't I want to imitate this as a composer? And it's why it's really important to guard what you feed yourself, what you're listening to, what you're really training your ear with what you're listening to. If the majority of pieces you like listening to are pieces that are written in our time frame, sacred music written in our era, it can be a little bit dangerous because a lot of that music kind of goes to an edge. Not all, but we just have to be very discerning and very careful. It's good to keep grounding yourself in Bach and keep giving your ear just a really good basis. And this is the traditional conservative classical style of writing. Even be careful of imitating cleaned up versions of pop music. Unfortunately, it's becoming super popular in fundamental circles to use cleaned up versions of pop music. And things that are born in a rock idiom, even a melody that's born in the rock idiom, you take away the trap set, you take away the drums, you just sing the melody. Most often there's aspects of the melody that still are pop, just in the melody by itself. And so we have to be very careful and discerning. Think about maybe some of your favorite music, or think about music that you've heard, and think, if the world would say, I love that, I'll come to a whole concert of that. It should put a red flag in our hearts. Just, oh, maybe this isn't the style I want to imitate. So what are the dangers? Beware of music that puts the mind in neutral. Often New Age music would be in this category. Usually there's a lack of a true melody. It's just kind of like mood music, just kind of setting, trying to get you in unthinking state. pop and rock music can do this just by virtue of the repetition. Even the expected beat on beat 2 and beat 4, the offbeat that continues to repeat, can kind of be that put you in like a neutral state, put your mind there. Whereas we believe truth will engage the mind. If we're giving text that's true, our mind shouldn't just be in this inactive state, in this neutral state. We should actually be engaged in the music, thinking about the text, and really responding to it that way. So beware of writing or listening to music exclusively that all sounds alike, that focuses only on one sound. There is a danger in even fundamental circles and music that's being written today that it can all kind of sound the same. You hear a certain composer or a certain group that even we use in fundamental churches, and you're like, oh, I can tell that's a such and such, so-and-so wrote that, because it kind of sounds the same. Part of the challenge is it's challenging, and as musicians, we have to keep growing so that our music doesn't all sound the same. It's easier to write a soft, gentle, introspective, meditative melody than it is to write something very bright. But we need to be thinking that our God that we serve is a God of love and mercy, but he's also a God of power and holiness. We don't want our music to just be one-sided and be lopsided. We want to make sure that we're writing things that reflect the attributes of who our God is. Beware of becoming desensitized to worldly sounds. And again, this is a lot of what we're listening to, what we're putting in our ears. That's what you're going to imitate. Even if it's not bad, but maybe it's just poor quality, try to train yourself. You know, there's a reason Bach's music is still around. There's a reason Beethoven's music has survived. So train yourself even with some of the great classical music that's following the rules of how God created music to be. Beware of becoming too enamored with something beautiful that you begin worshiping it instead of the Lord. And this can be a real danger for musicians and composers especially, because you get so into the sound of things and you're analyzing and just trying to figure out, and you can get really enamored with a certain sound or a certain artist even. Beware of anything that produces a catch in your spirit. Be sensitive to the Lord above all else. And I think this is our biggest safeguard as composers. We really have to ask the Lord, and if we're in doubt, err on the side of caution. Realize in the future you can make changes based upon your spiritual growth and maturity, discernment, level of discernment, but err on the side of caution. You don't need to do things that might be a stumbling block to someone else. Mrs. Pinkston tells a story of she was writing a piece of music one time, and she said she brought it to some of her students and played it for them, and their response was, "Wow, that was so awesome! Whoa, I can't believe you wrote that!" And she said she got scared and she went home and burned it. And she thought if that was their reaction, she didn't feel like it was a spiritual reaction. They weren't responding to the message in the music. And she just thought she wants to be so careful that her music would stay above reproach and be excellent. And so just be sensitive. To me, it's much more of a responsibility to be a composer even than an arranger. Although you're doing essentially the same thing, but somehow to start with, this is my melody and these are my harmonies and I'm the one doing something with it. We have a great task ahead of us. So I think perhaps Mr. Bacharach has talked to you about some of these weakening elements in maybe a theology of music class. I appreciate how he considers these, because music isn't so easy to just say, this is a good piece, this is a bad piece, this is right, this is wrong. It's not always that cut and dried and that easy to discern. But I appreciate how he has a list of weakening elements that kind of can help make a piece weaker or stronger, whether you include them or avoid them. If a piece does include a weakening element, it doesn't mean, oh, automatically that's sinful, I can never use that piece. It just means it might be a little bit weaker than some other pieces that I would use. If you think of it in the area of food, I think it's helpful. I don't think that you would eat ice cream all day, every day. Replace all of your rice with ice cream. No, that would not be a healthy solution to your life diet. And yet ice cream once in a while for a treat is great. And it's kind of like this in music. There are certain things in music that can be fun. You kind of can listen to them and you enjoy it, but a steady diet of that as a composer, either what you're listening to or what you're writing, isn't going to be helpful. And so we just want to be discerning. So one of the weakening elements would be de-emphasizing the strong beat. This would be beat anticipation. So if you're in 4/4, your strong beats should be beat 1 and beat 3. So if there's a melody where there's no beat 1 and there's no beat 3 because there's always a tie to beat 1 and there's always a tie to beat 3, these are melodies that are being written. I don't expect you all to write this kind of music, but these are melodies that are being written, and we don't have a beat 1 and we don't have a beat 3 because we're expecting our body to fill in. And it can be a problem. So of course we want to be aware of that. But there's another way you can de-emphasize the strong syllables just by emphasizing the weak syllables. So this isn't even, your rhythm might be fine, but now your syllable, your accent is in the wrong place in your word, and it's emphasizing it in a wrong way. Excessive use of seventh chords. Seventh chords are great. They can add great warmth to melodies. They can give a stronger resolution pull. But an excessive use of seventh chords, particularly if they're unresolved, you can have this whole string of seventh chords and none of the sevenths resolve down. They all just kind of leap away to something else. That can give us more of a pop sound that we want to be aware of. Excessive use of unresolved dissonances. These would be like escape tones. Escape tones are allowed to resolve by leap, but an excessive use of those in a melody could be an issue, could be a problem. A static melody. So a melody where either the pitch or the rhythm is pretty much the same. Again, it just kind of doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't really lead us anywhere. Harmonic progressions common to pop or rock music. One of them that, again, it's not wrong, but it can be overused, and it's not my favorite progression anyway, is a 5 chord leading us backwards to a 4 chord. That 5 to 4 chord is just a very pop sound, and so we want to be aware of it. Melodic anticipation before a strong beat, used in a melisma or as a unifying element. This is kind of a big one today. Almost all, I shouldn't say all, but a lot of music that's being written right now that we want to use in our churches has a lot of melodic anticipation throughout it, and sometimes as the unifying element. And melodic anticipation isn't wrong. Bach used it. Every classical composer through the ages used it, but they used it in a different way than we're hearing right now in the pop sound. So there's kind of a discernment of just your ear knowing, oh yeah, that sounds pop to me. That doesn't sound like a classical style. And maybe it's not all wrong, but maybe there's just an association that we need to be careful of. So just be aware of these things. Okay, a couple examples. Here is a piece. This is Sovereign Grace, I believe, Stephen Vicky Cook. And you notice how the rhythm works. We're in 4/4, and you notice how there's a tie leading us over to beat 3. So we have 1 and 2 and 3. We don't have anything happening on beat 3. We just have that tie held over to de-emphasize the third beat in the measure. And it happens again, happens throughout the piece. Some music, it's interesting, if you want to analyze, you find some free music, you look at something, you will just see the whole score full of ties. And it's kind of obvious. It's like, oh, tie to beat 1, tie to beat 3, tie to beat 1, tie to beat 3. Probably not. And they usually will end like on the and right before it. So they're always anticipating the beat, and so they're just kind of off. It's really hard to do, actually. I don't know quite how I guess they get used to it, but it's just a whole different style. Then you're probably familiar with this piece. This has become one of Getty's maybe most popular pieces. And when I refer to Getty's music and Sovereign Grace, are all of you familiar with that music? Do you know what I'm talking about when I refer to them? Have you heard them? It's kind of a big deal in the States, and I don't know if it's reached the Philippines in as much fervor as it has in the States, but unfortunately, a lot of fundamental churches have embraced it, have tried to clean it up and embraced it. And so this is a piece that you have several things going on. You just look at the introduction. You have the de-emphasis of beat 3, beat 1, beat 3, beat 3, beat 1, beat 3. So we're de-emphasizing the main beats, the strong beats in the introduction. Then when the melody comes in, we have this melodic anticipation. A to B before we really get to the B harmony. It's anticipating it. B to C sharp before we get to the that harmony. The whole melody is based on this melodic anticipation. And churches clean it up and they like to sing it. One thing I have an issue with is if there's young people in the church, I know that they're probably going to go online and search that song and listen to the original. And the original is not something that I would want them to listen to. So I'm going to try. I don't know if I can play. I'm going to see if I can play this part of this for you. Okay, just a second here. Okay. Whoops. Interesting. I don't know if I... Okay, sorry, just a second. I'm trying to share my computer's audio with you at the same time where you can watch the music. I'm not sure if that's going to be possible to do, but let's try. You can see the music now? Can you see the music? Okay. All right, let's see if you can hear the sound now. This is really funny. I just can't get to it. Okay, this should work, I think.
Oh, to see the dawn of the darkest day, Christ on the road to Calvary, tried by sinful men, torn and beaten, then nailed to a cross of wood. Oh, to see the pain.
Okay, I think you got enough of a taste of it. Besides vocal style and other things. But you can see how you can clean up the vocal style, you can get rid of the beat, and churches are using it here. Good churches. I'm not talking about churches that are even weak. Good churches have embraced this and tried to clean it up. And it's sad to me that they're embracing this that's coming from, it's born in a rock idiom. The Getty's stated purpose is to blend hymns with folk and pop music. So it's very appealing because their texts are very good. Their quality of music is very good. They're trained musicians. And their melodies are nice. And they do a folk style, so it doesn't sound as bad as most of the other CCM. But it's something we want to be aware of, that the elements that are present here, the melodic anticipation, we just want to be aware in our pieces. Okay, now I want to get a little closer to home. These are pieces you probably do know, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with them, but there are some elements that I think we just need to be aware because they can be overdone. We have My Jesus Fair. I think I have the audio of this. Can you hear that? Could you hear that? Okay. Whoops. Can anyone tell me where there's a non-melodic tone? Or either I'll just tell you it's an escape tone. That's, you leap away from it. Can anyone see in the melody where that happens? Somewhere on the second line. Do you see it? Cherry, what do you think?
Can you play once again? Sorry.
Am I not sharing my screen? I'm meaning to be sharing my screen with you right now. Okay, can you see it now? So on the second line, we have a non-chord tone.
A po.
What did you say? I'm sorry.
A.
The A, right here, because we're on a G chord. The melody goes from a G to an A and then leaps away to the E. So we have a non-chord tone that's not resolved. Not a problem. It happens once, I think, in the whole piece. But if that became the unifying factor of the piece, you could see how it would become weaker. The nice thing about non-chord tones is that they have an expressive quality about them, but we just have to be careful how we use them. And so, one example. You've probably heard Relentless Love before. See if you can find where the non-chord tone is in this one. We'll go back. All right, who saw the non-chord tone in the first part of this? A note in the melody that's not fitting the chord that's there. It happens twice. There are passing tones, right? Do you see some passing tones in there? There are some passing tones. That's pretty normal. They happen on the weak part of the beat. That's pretty normal. There's nothing unusual about that. There's a neighbor tone somewhere on the weak part of the beat. That's pretty normal. See if you can find a passing tone that happens on a strong beat or on the strong part of the beat. You see it?
E po.
Yes, the E right there at the beginning. Relentless Love. So we have an outline of a D chord. D, F sharp, A. We're all on a D chord except for that E, and it happens to come on the downbeat. Again, not a problem if it's not overused. In this case, the text actually fits that pull because the text is relentless love. We have this pull happening. So listen how the melody works again. It fits in with the harmonies. Just listen. Okay, that makes sense? So those are the kind of things, melodic anticipation, accented dissonances, or unresolved dissonances, where if your piece is full of them, then it could be weaker. It could have a weaker sound. And it's one thing you can keep in mind for even analyzing other melodies and other texts. Not wrong to use them, but it's your ice cream, it's not your rice. So just keep in mind to not overdo, to not make them the unifying part of your piece. All right. So, conclusion, it is possible, with the Lord's help, to write melodies that have a strong sound and communicate truth effectively without compromise. It is possible. And we really need to depend on the Lord to help us and be sensitive. If there's something you write and someone else has a problem with it, or you have a little catch in your spirit, you're not sure, just be very aware and be very sensitive of that. Right, any questions?
I do have a question po.
Yes.
How does repetition of chord progression affect uh the the melody of a piece and its total feel with a song? Because I remembered po last time Sir EJ introduced sa biblical philosophy of music, a cleaned up version of a pop of a CCM piece. Um, singing style was neat and it's all cleaned up. And he asked us to analyze the chord, but he is not so sure. But he mentioned that there must be something in the chords that we also need to be aware of. We observe that there is an excessive use of 1/4 and then back to 1 and then 4. So how does that really affect?
I think it depends, but if it's like a repetitive chord progression that keeps going around, again, I think part of that can put your mind in neutral. You're not really having to think about what's happening. You're just kind of being lulled. You know, repetitive rhythm, repetitive chord progression, repetitive static melody that's not really going anywhere. All of those things could be a problem. Um, it's unfortunately it's not cut and dried. It's not like if it has one of these and two of these, then you know it's bad. It's not like that. So it's not that simple. And that's why I think many, even conservative believers fall in the area of music and go too far in a worldly styles because it's difficult to discern. And pastors who have no music training, it's hard for them. Sometimes that's what happens here, actually. Sometimes they'll just say, oh, I don't know anything about music. I just leave it up to whoever. So then they don't, as the pastor, they don't take responsibility to lead their church in that aspect. They just go along with whatever because they say they don't understand. So it's good to have men who are understanding music. We need that.
Thank you po.
Anyone else? All right. Then I will see you Wednesday morning with your rhythms. And you can do it. Filipino text, all your accents as lined as nicely as possible. I've asked Miss Julian to join us on Wednesday, so she'll be able to give some feedback as well. That will be helpful. So I will see you then. Hope you have a good rest of your Friday on a Monday. Bye.
Good night po.
Thank you po and good night.